Welcome to Monday's edition of Normal Islands Live. I was also hosting on Friday, so I hope you're not sick of me. Now, tonight I'm joined by Turn Left contributor Lewis Aaron. Last night you had some back trouble. I mean, how are you feeling right now?
Oh, not bad. Got plenty of drugs pumping through my
Get
system.
those
So anything
drugs
that I
in
say
you.
tonight is simply not my fault. So I could just blame it on all the drugs. But yeah, no, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. The NHS reacted quite quickly. Got a GP appointment pretty quickly, and I'm all good. I'm all good. Looking forward to tonight. We've got lots of news.
Well, we stand the NHS, and also I love the fact that we shouldn't take what you're saying seriously, even though we're talking about some very important topics. I'm sure you'll pull through. But I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Now, here is what is coming up on tonight's show. Liz Kendall attacks people on benefits. Millions sign petition calling for a general election. And Israel invokes sanctions on Haaretz. As always, keep those comments coming in, and about halfway through, we'll be reading them out. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. Now, on to our first story. Labour are going to crack down on benefits. Yep, we've never heard of this before. How refreshing. Keir Starmer has promised zero tolerance for benefit cheats as Labour seeks to tackle Britain's ballooning welfare bill. The Prime Minister warned those who try to take advantage of state generosity will feel the full force of the law, and that ministers would even take cash straight from the banks of fraudsters. His vow came as ministers prepare to unveil tough changes to the welfare system later this week. Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall said on Sunday that young people who repeatedly refused to take up jobs or training would lose their benefits. Now, this was announced in the Daily Mail, of all places, and despite Starmer talking about benefit cheats, he doesn't want to be divisive. Writing for the Daily Mail on Sunday, the Labour leader pledged the public would see sweeping changes because, make no mistake, we will get to grips with a bulging benefits bill blighting our society. Labour said it will stick by a Tory commitment to slash the cost of the welfare bill by $3 billion over 5 years, although Sir Keir also promised not to call people shirkers or go down the road of division, a dig at previous Conservative governments. I mean, that's what he's doing. He's intentionally going to war with the most vulnerable people in society. And Liz Kendall was attacking young people, threatening to take their benefits if they don't find a job. Now, this has been the type of politics Liz Kendall has always been about. 4.5 Liz, we like to call her. It's nothing to do with the circumstances or the Tories ruining the economy. This is just her all over. And now she's finally in a position to go for people who are struggling. And I find it disgusting that Starmer claims this is a blight on society. Now, earlier in the day, I caught up with Green Party Deputy Leader Zack Polanski for his response to this announcement.
Young people who can't find work. How about the Labour government talk about funding education, apprenticeships, supporting people, bringing down rents, rent controls, a wealth tax? All these kind of conversations should be their priority rather than this kind of quasi-conservative reform type language that Labour seem far too often to adopt.
And look, Labour are currently very, very unpopular. And I think that right now their priority seems to be, let's attack people on benefits. I want to ask you, though, who exactly do they think they're winning over by doing this?
Well, I think it's the exact same mistakes that we just saw Kamala Harris make in America with the Democrats, where often the criticism is that the Democrats on the left, and I don't think they should necessarily be, or they shouldn't be classed as the left, but the criticism is, they were too woke. They were talking about LGBT rights, or they were talking about people with disabilities or migrants. And the real truth is, if you watch that campaign, they weren't really talking about these things at all. And where they were talking about it, particularly, for instance, if we look at trans rights, they were speaking at it from the right. Also, Kamala Harris famously said on the Oprah Winfrey Show that if someone broke into a house and she had a gun, she would shoot them. So the idea that they were on the left is absolutely absurd. On top of that, and this is where it's really relevant to the UK, they weren't speaking about the basic thing that needed to be spoken about, and that is the inequality in our societies and the fact that we needed to redistribute wealth to support working class people and or marginalized communities. Now, that's a real piece of work that needs to happen to unite the workers, and crucially in this conversation, people who aren't working too. Now, that narrative, I think, is waiting to be told. But the Labour Party are not doing that. They're not telling that narrative because they're not planning to go down that narrative. Instead, they are appeasing the right. And actually, when you look at what's happened in America and around Europe and around the world, when you appease the right, you are basically rolling out the red carpet for them. You are shifting the entire conversation, and that does encourage and increase the rise of fascism. So it sounds like it's a big jump to go from what Liz Kendall's announcing to fascism. So let me be very clear that, some of the intentions here, I think we can talk about the idea that to support young people, to support mental health services, to support people into good work that they enjoy and feel is enriching them. Sure, that's a conversation we can have. But the entire tone and the entire way this is being done seems entirely to appease the right. And that is both a dangerous mistake and will only help reform in just a few years' time. Well, in fact, it's helping reform right now.
I completely agree with that it's helping reform. Now, I was reading an article about this story earlier on, and Starmer said he didn't want to divide or accuse people of being shirkers, but isn't that policy doing exactly that by implication?
I mean, it's entirely that. And let's be clear about the numbers here. If you take benefit fraud versus tax fraud is costing 9 times as much money. Yet we hear about, so-called benefit scroungers constantly in our media. So the entire framing is entirely wrong. But the other issue here is, if Labour are worried about this, they could be looking at a truly transformational programme. Now, whether that's a universal basic income, universal basic services, a job guarantee, whatever it might be, there are frames there that you can take on and go, let's do something transformational here. And, just to be clear, I do think we're at a moment in our history where we need economic transformation and we need to do that. But these plans are nowhere near that. In fact, they just seem like they're going to be cost-cutting measures because, yes, job centres don't work. They're alienating for the people who use them, and also they're alienating for the staff who are having to assess people and treat them just as numbers. But we're not seeing any of that kind of discourse or any of that conversation. It seems to actually be going down the line of we're going to make things worse for people. And that just, is totally incoherent at the same time that you're capping a 2-child benefit cap, and at the same time as you're cutting winter fuel payments. It just feels like the Labour Party is determined to go after the poorest people in our society and punish them even more for being poor, as opposed to go, there is immense wealth in our society, multimillionaires and billionaires, let's start tackling inequality.
I mean, I do want to discuss about UBI in a second. I know it's a Green Party policy, something you support. But do you think this is a political calculation from Labour? Or do you think, do you know what, this is the likes of Liz Kendall, for example, they're just finally enacting the sort of policies that they want. So they're not trying to win over voters, but this is just who some people in the Labour right are.
I think it's a bit of both. And I think it's time they stop calling themselves the Labour Party and start calling themselves the Capital Party. We're seeing from almost every single move that they're making, they're trying to shift money from the public purse to the private person. I'm sure in somewhere within these job reforms, without a doubt, there will be outsourcing. There will be more private companies that are coming in. And imagine as the rise of artificial intelligence happens, they'll be looking to automate these things in a way that makes some of these companies huge amount of money. Because I really think, if you're truly a Labour Party, or if you're truly the party who care about the workers or families or communities, there are so many other things you could be doing here, and there's so many other ways you could be having this conversation.
I mean, it makes me think, what constituency is the Labour Party appealing to by saying we're going to cut down on benefits? Because what you will notice, and whether we believe them or not, and I don't believe them, but reform people like Lee Anderson are saying, cutting the winter fuel payments is disgraceful. They even said, or Nigel Farage said during the general election, they opposed the 2-child benefit cap. Again, I don't know whether I believe them or not, but the terrain traditionally of the right was we need to cut benefits, we need to enact austerity. But you're not seeing reforms say that. They're at least pretending that they're economic populists in a way. And it just feels like the Labour Party are trying to appeal to people who aren't there. And that leads into a situation where the right, reform, or the GOP in America and Donald Trump are creating this false narrative that they're the anti-establishment political movement when they're not. So I cannot understand the political calculation that's happening inside the Labour Party. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you've spoken to far more Labour politicians than I have. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, I think you're exactly right in your analysis, first of all. And I think the real danger for us that if you are on the right and you're telling economic populism, I just spoke about how on the left we've got to tell this story,
Yeah.
but I put the caveat in there too that the story has to be true. It has to be based on objective evidence, which it
Yeah.
absolutely can. But it means when we communicate, we have to communicate in numbers and data, and we have to build the story in a way that we're also holding a lot of nuance. If you're on the right, you don't need to hold that nuance. Reform, Donald Trump, they don't care about the facts. They will just make them up. So their one sole goal is to get people in the gut and to tell a story. And they're incredibly effective at that because let's be clear in this interview. If you ask most members of the British public, do you think that people who are not looking for work should get benefits? I imagine they would lean towards conservatism because a story for a long time has been told about that. And the right wing has pushed that story through legacy media, through the stories that are told, the TV shows, the benefit scroungers, etc. So we're undoing a lot of kind of framing that has been set over decades. Now, again, I think that framing is totally dismantleable. And I think the other good thing here is we don't just like dismantle it a little bit. I think this is where it pushes us to tell a whole story about economic framing. And that's the whole story about us being a sovereign currency, about how we can create money, how we can make sure that that money is being spent on green infrastructure, on jobs, how essentially, as Keynes said, how to win a war. This is the moment how to tackle a climate crisis. That actually we've got this huge moment where we can create jobs, where we can bolster the trade unions, where we can make sure that people have good working conditions, that they're organizing, that we're protecting minority communities. So I think there's a really exciting story to be told there, but it's a story that has to be based in truth. In terms of the Labour politicians, I think it depends which Labour politician that you're talking about. Now, the one that I know the best, I guess, because I regularly speak to him both, or challenging him in public, is Sadiq Khan. And he's in a really interesting place because so if we take aviation expansion, for instance, something I've been challenging on for a long time, he will say that he agrees with me or that he doesn't want more aviation expansion. And then I asked him to write a letter with me or co-sign a letter with me the other day about it. And not going to co-sign the letter with the Green Party. Like he completely mocked the idea. And then literally 2 days later in the budget, the Labour government announced aviation expansion. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I think we've got Labour politicians who are very willing to say the right things, particularly to the left or to a wider audience. But then actually when it comes down to voting for it, or doing the mechanism which will stop the bad thing happening or incentivize the good thing, they will not take the action. So I think we're seeing that more and more with Labour politicians. And I think it's really important that to those Labour politicians who we broadly agree with and we can see are not happy within the Labour Party, that we don't just outwardly condemn them, but actually really support them in saying there are other alternatives, there are other ways to go. And at some point, they've got to look at their conscience and go, if you got into politics to tackle the inequality in our society, we have a Labour government that is literally exacerbating that inequality. And not just what is the point of a Labour government or what the point of a Labour Party, what is the point of a Labour MP if it's not to challenge inequality?
Zach, always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Oh, a bit of a delay there. We're back. That was Green Party Deputy Leader Zack Polanski. I want to thank him for giving me his time. He had a very, very busy day. That's also part of a long interview that's going to go out on Sunday. So look forward to seeing that. Look, Lewis, Labour are incredibly, incredibly unpopular. And they think that right now their priority should be to attack those on benefits. So what do you make of that? And what do you make of Zack's response?
Are they unpopular? I didn't hear about that. All right. Obviously, I'll do the typical, media thing that you have to do at the beginning, but I do think it's fair. Obviously, Labour have been handed a shit deck of cards. Let's get let's get that bit out of the way because obviously that's just facts. But obviously the way they're going about this is just the most horrible way. Obviously, again, they're just doing this thing where they're appealing to the centre and going after young people after they've gone through this unprecedented time after the pandemic, where obviously this is the driving factor of what's causing lots of young people not to seek out work. I think the data is about like 700,000 young people between like 16 and 24 who are not in education, not in employment, or not seeking anything like that. So that's a unique thing that's happened under unique circumstances. So it needs a unique approach. Just trying to be the good old fashioned, people are scrounging off of benefits and the only way to get them off of it is driving fear into people is just not going to work. We need a unique approach to this. I understand again that all the services that they might need to help young people, whether it's mental health, whether it's money, all of these things are very much lacking right now. But still, this approach just isn't going to work. Young people have been suffering a lot, especially over the last few years. We still don't know to this day that the long-term effects on the mental health that the pandemic has put upon young people, and it is specifically that group who has suffered the most out of it. And I was reading in the FT earlier, I think it was the Health Foundation. I can't remember the full name. I do apologize because I'm going to use their data and quote them, but they were tracking like the amount of people who basically have very low qualifications. Like I think it's about a fifth of these people don't have anything higher than a GCSE, and the trend is specifically linked to people who don't have either few or no qualifications. So the only way to actually approach this is by throwing resources at them, right? Throwing people at them, throwing everything that we can at them, everything but fear. Just telling these people who are literally on benefits on universal credit right now for what has been listed as depression, anxiety. How is filling them with fear, which is going to fuel their depression, fuel their anxiety, how is any of this going to help them get better? It is not. So we obviously need a different approach. What that approach could be so many different things. It could be incentives. It could be working with specific employers. We also have another issue that about year on year, 40% of entry-level jobs are down. So the people who have the least amount of qualifications in that age group who are out of work also have 40% less of the opportunity than they did last year to actually go out and find one of these jobs. So we obviously need to upskill these people. And the only way to do that is obviously offer a carrot. But right now they're only offering the stick. It's just not going to work. And it's just probably going to make things worse for these people.
I mean, our friends at the Canary have done some really good work on this. They cover a lot of DWP stuff. And when I last looked at a report they made, it showed that there were more people out of work than there were vacancies. So it's literally impossible to say, well, we need to get all these people into work because there just are no jobs. And the jobs that are often there for those who have lower education are terrible, poorly paid, poorly conditioned work. It's the gig economy. You're talking about Uber drivers or riders, precarious work. And it's turning around and saying we're going to scrap your benefits. You're absolutely right. You're putting the fear in them, which if you look at a health perspective, it's going to make them even worse. And we also know that since COVID, long-term sickness has actually gone up. And that's obviously what prompted Rishi Sunak to say, oh, we're just a sick nation or people are skiving. I think it's really, really insane because during the pandemic, a lot of us said, are things going to change? And some politicians were saying, we cannot be the country that we were going into the pandemic. And there was a conversation about maybe having more state intervention, given that we had furlough and furlough was successful. I was probably thinking we're going to just return back to normal, which is what we've done. And now we are probably a sicker nation mentally and physically, but that's not because we're a nation of shirkers. It's because we have been through a pandemic and we've been through also 14 years of austerity. And I find it incredibly funny how, to be fair, it fits the bill. Keir Starmer in that Daily Mail article says, in terms of policy, it's continuing conservative policy. However, he says, well, I don't want to call people shirkers at a supposed dig at the Conservatives. So what that basically says is we're going to continue the policy, but on rhetoric, we're going to be slightly different. So for them, it's just changing the vibes, not changing the policy. I want to ask you, though, I mean, who are Labour trying to win over? I mean, I asked Zack this earlier. I mean, I don't think they're going to be winning over Tory or Reform voters because these people, especially Reform voters, absolutely despise Labour. There's nothing they can convince them on. They're hated by them. And at the same time, the left hates Labour too, but they're more likely to pick up left-wing voters than right-wing voters. And if you're going to clamp down on benefits even further, when we have like the lowest level of benefits in Europe, who's that going to convince? I mean, what political calculation do you think is happening here, if there even is one?
No, I think they might be trying to appeal to some of those older voters who, think that millennials and Gen Z spend too much money on coffee and, avocado toast, all that type of cliche stuff. They might be trying to appeal to those people. Obviously, let's not deny, it is a genuine issue. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people out of, they're simply obviously doing nothing, but besides obviously focusing on potentially getting better, but they don't have those resources to get better. So, I don't know, maybe the political calculation position is like maybe they're not trying to appeal to anyone. Maybe they are just trying to be tough, which again isn't going to work. It simply doesn't make any sense. But again, there is that generation out there who thinks that, you know, the young people are lazy and all that lovely GB news stuff. Maybe that's who he's trying to appeal to. But, you know, on top of this, I wouldn't even be surprised if he starts going down the route of Rishi Sunak, where they were going to try and, you know, stop doctors handing out sick notes to make people go back to work, and make it go through another process. But again, like, if they want to appeal to anyone, Curtis, the type of people that they need to appeal to is the people that they're talking about. And this is when I was just talking about they need to offer a better carrot, right? They need to offer incentives to these people. They need to offer more support to these people. You know, if a person who goes back into full-time employment on minimum wage is on, I don't know, 18 to 20,000 pounds, and they're paying thousands of pounds in tax at the end of the year, you know, spending money on private help, even, like, I don't want to spend money on private help, but even if we have to tap into those markets to get these people the help that they need, but not with the mindset of like, we only want to help these people just so we can get them back into work so they can, you know, start paying taxes and stop, you know, rinsing off of the system, which is which is the story that they're telling. Is because we actually need to help these people. They went through something very traumatic at such a young age, and obviously the people who are suffering the most are the people who didn't have access to the resources that they needed to have a nice environment during that time when they were locked up for 1 to 2 years. So if they want to win over any voters, they need to be appealing to the people that they're talking about by actually offering them something. But they're not. They said they're going to, you know, overhaul the apprenticeship system. But again, what's that going to look like? Obviously, it's not even just about the money, right? There are organizations out there who are actually offering decent pay on some jobs. Obviously, that's not getting them moving. These young people need help. And I don't necessarily have the exact solution, but something else needs to be offered in terms of getting these people in the right mindset where, you know, where they want to work, where they want to do something, where they want to pursue qualifications. And we have so many vacancies out there in terms of sectors that do need help, that are desperate for people. We could work with these employers. You know, I have a friend who went with Sky Coding Club, and they became a qualified coder in 12 weeks working with Sky, which I thought was a great program. We need more stuff like that, where people, you know, aren't intimidated by, you know, thinking they have to go back to university or have to go take on some big expensive course that's out there to pursue the things that they want to do. But they're not doing that. They're just wanting to hit them with the stick.
Well, you mentioned as well that maybe they're trying to appeal to older voters who kind of eat up that whole benefit scrounger rhetoric. But then at the same time, they've also scrapped the winter fuel payments. So it just seems that these guys have zero political insight, zero strategy. They are pissing everyone off. They're pissing off farmers. They're pissing off pensioners. It's like they are trying to lose voters. But I think, again, this is what happens. And I said this from the beginning. You know, the Blairites or the right wing in the Labour Party are not politically smart. They are just very fortunate. And as we've seen in this election, they're very fortunate that the Tories collapsed. But now we've got millions of people pissed off with this government, which actually ties us in perfectly to our next story. So we are going to move on, but we are going to be sticking with the Labour Party. Now, a petition calling for a general election has hit over 2 million signatures. The petition was created by Michael Westwood, which says, "I would like there to be another general election. I believe the current Labour government have gone back on their promise they laid out to lead up to the last election." And I find the language of this quite funny. It's like, I would like there to be an election. Oh, would you? It's just, it's funny. Now, 2 million is a lot of people, but it's not that surprising given the fact that big accounts, GB News pundits, actor Michael Caine, and even Elon Musk has shared it. Now, I do find this sort of thing a little bit cringe. I mean, when the left did it, I cringed too. And now those on the right are doing the same thing. Whether we like it or not, and I certainly don't, but over 9 million people voted for this government. So what is the point in a petition? Now, they claim it's because the government lied. Have these people just recently joined the political arena? Every party lies. The difference is those of us on the left call it out regardless of which party, whereas this seems to me as simply partisan hacks, angry that they seem to think that this centre-right corporatist party is somehow really, really left wing. Now, having said that, it is undeniable that Starmer and the Labour Party are incredibly unpopular. Lewis, as I said earlier, they seem to have pissed off everyone. This petition will obviously make no difference. However, it is a sign of discontent with a government that is literally only a few months old.
Yeah, obviously, people have the right to make a petition on whatever they want. But what frustrates me, this goes out to like everyone who does this, is like just like the online warriors, the online activists. Like
Yeah.
a lot of these people who think they've done something by signing this petition. And again, petitions are helpful, but not in this context. It's just ridiculous. And what frustrates me is that obviously it's as you said, it's like the GB News pundits, it's Nigel Farage, it's Reform voters and the Reform Party. I spend a lot of time on TikTok Live, way too much, and everybody who's been promoting this, which I've seen dozens of lives with hundreds of viewers, it's all like the Reform voters. And what's really funny about this is that these are the people who, the top issues that they care about are like, immigration. They say they care about the NHS. And, if they actually want to organize anything, the things that they need to be focusing on is maybe, if you want to prevent, future immigration, maybe you should be out organizing against the war that's currently going on in the Middle East, right? We know from the Iraq war that the destabilization of the Middle East led to immigration, right? Lots of asylum seekers, lots of refugees, lots of displacement. If I'm a Reform voter, and I feel like I'm almost trying to trick them into becoming left, if I'm a Reform voter, and that it's a big driver of immigration, then I would be out protesting in the streets right now to stop the wars. On top of that, how many of these people who signed that petition, ever marched for nurses' pay, for teachers' pay? Most of these people have never organized anything in their life, but they feel like they've somehow achieved something, that this is some breakthrough moment because they've signed a petition.
Musk is one of those who shared it, and he said that this government is tyrannical, right? And you mentioned how many of these people go out and strike or support strikers. Well, we know that Elon Musk was bragging to Donald Trump on his call, saying how he was clamping down on unions, and that was a good thing. So there is no crossover between those who are a lot of these people signing this petition than those that actually care about the issues. And in terms of immigration, well, what I find quite funny is that Labour have capitulated to the right on these policies. They've been very hawkish. They've been extremely, they've been going after asylum seekers, stopping the boats. And yet these people are still not happy, which shows this political opportunism.
Do you know who they shouldn't be happy with, Curtis? Because I got the data on this actually last week for a video that I was doing. In terms of like people who are actually doing their job. Now, I don't agree with many of the things that Labour are doing, but in terms of people actually doing their job and people they should be angry at, I checked how many times the Reform Party have actually been in Parliament. Now, I don't have the exact data of like the time, but what I do have is like the amount of votes that they do. So big shout out to the Green Party. But the Green Party, for example, there's been about 45 opportunities to vote in Parliament since these people got elected. And the Green Party, have voted almost on every single one of them. One MP 40 times, another MP 37, Carla 40, Ellie Chowns 40. The Reform Party, Nigel Farage has voted in Parliament 14 times. A lot of the votes that have taken place have been during his show because he'd rather be earning £100,000 a month than actually being in Parliament, actually trying to affect change, debate, all that type of stuff. Lee Anderson, 27, Richard Tice, 27, Rupert Lowe, 24, and James Murdoch, 25. Where are the Reform Party? Because it's their voters right now who are trying to push these petitions, but they're not even paying attention to the MPs that they like, to the party that they like, because they're not spending as much time in Parliament as most other MPs are. So where are they and what are they doing? They're not obviously working on the behalf of their constituents, for the people, the apparent 100,000 people who pay a monthly fee to Reform. Why is nobody paying attention to that?
And Farage says he was too scared to go to his constituency. He said it's a security issue, but then he's on a march for farmers with cameras everywhere and no security there. It's almost as if he was making an excuse because he doesn't want to do his job. He's not there to do that. He's not there to represent the people. If there's any Reform people watching, we get some, and you're all welcome, by the way. What me and Lewis want to tell you is they do not care about these issues, and they don't care about you. I mean, they're a party, rich people, a bunch of rich people, ex-Tories, Nigel Farage, ex-Tory city banker. Do you think he cares about you? No, he doesn't.
Richard Tice, private school. Nigel Farage, private school. Richard, Rupert, and Nigel are all millionaires. Um, it's frustrating because they won't even look inwards before they look outwards. I get the discontent with Labour. People can argue about how they've broken their promises from the manifesto, but again, this is almost going to sound like I'm defending them, which I hate, is that the true measure of what they're going to be able to achieve isn't going to be visible for years, right? In terms of the moves that they make on who they're going to tax, we can criticize that, but the full, we need to give them their full 5 years to actually see what kind of job that they do. And just doing distraction techniques on, signing a petition of for 2 million people to sign a petition, it's just useless. It's annoying. We've got scandals in the Church of England. We've got so many things going on in this country right now that deserve more attention. But no, people are angry. The Labour government signing a petition. People are angry at a Boots advert. People are angry at a Jaguar advert. But nobody seems to be angry at the right things or doing anything about it.
Well, speaking of broken promises, in that petition, many of those who shared it have said Labour have lied. They went back on their promises. But I'm interested to know, which promises did they break? I mean, I seem to remember an election where Labour was saying, we're not really going to change much, and it's just going to be difficult decisions, and don't be too optimistic. I mean, the only thing you could point to is no tax rises, but they did say no tax rises on working people. And the recent announcement, which is an end to a tax break for inheritance tax over £1 million, isn't really going back on their word. So what do you think they're really angry about? I mean, they've capitulated to the right on so many issues. So this, to me, feels more vibes than policy, don't you think?
Oh, it's absolute vibes. Like, again, let's give Labour credit where it's due if we have to, right? With the farmers thing, not to go into it too deeply, but essentially they've just, made it a level playing field, that they're paying the same taxes everybody else should now in many ways. When it comes to private school taxes, why should people who are very rich and can afford to send their kids to private school not pay tax on what is a luxury item, right? In many ways, they have actually gone after the rich, not in the way that I wish they would. There's so many more things that they could do, but they have actually stuck to those promises, despite the fact that it had a lot of political pressure. They're very unpopular, but they've still done it. And I'm happy that they've done those things. And I hope that they stick to some other promises that they've gone ahead with that were in their manifesto, but we will see. But again, it's frustrating that, a bunch of people who vote reform, who are on this side, signing these petitions, who are probably, very working class people, actually don't see that Labour are, in fact, sticking to some of their promises, despite the fact that I have got a diary length of issues with the Labour Party. They don't seem to have deviated too much so far, really.
Yeah. I mean, I wish they lied more. I wish they did deviate. I wish they were radically left-wing, which I knew was never going to happen. And a lot of the most... the Starmerites, the Starmer supporters, like, don't worry, as soon as he gets elected, he'll be left-wing. No, he's not.
Oh, I was naive enough to think that for a very short while, but...
Well, I hope you learn your lesson.
I fucking well did.
I want to ask you about Elon Musk. I mean, he shared the petition. He called the UK tyrannical. He's clearly not content with buying or trying to buy the US election. He now wants to influence our politics. And I think it's crazy that, let's be honest, barely anyone is mentioning the power of billionaires in our politics. Obviously, we don't expect that to be brought up in mainstream media. I also would like you to tell me, what is tyrannical about this Labour government? I mean, they certainly are authoritarian, believe me. But the way people like Musk make it out is that we're living in an extremely oppressive dictatorship. And that is always like a dog whistle to say it's socialism, it's communism, even though it's nothing to do with that. You tell me, are we living in an oppressive dictatorship?
Help, I feel oppressed. But no, it's ridiculous. They're not tyrannical at all. Obviously, the Tory party did some tyrannical shit, right? Like Suella Braverman with her protest bill. They changed a few of the laws, which were definitely impeding on our human rights. But
I mean, you do have to say about, to be fair, when it comes to protests, Labour aren't good on it, and obviously like Just Stop Oil. Again, they're terrible in this issue, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But in terms of like the spectrum, are Labour actually tyrannical in any way? It's ridiculous. Do you know who is tyrannical? The richest man in the world, who is completely unelected, who is now in a very powerful government position, or is about to be, in the US. A guy who owns a social media platform that he uses at his will. A guy who's been recently reported as having secret conversations with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. A guy who has multiple satellites that help multiple militaries around the world conduct their military operations, including Ukraine. It's wild. If anything's tyrannical, it's Elon Musk. An unelected man has such a power, not just on the US, but the world, and nobody's ever voted for this guy. Just he's also a guy who, in an interview, I think it was with Don Lemon, the one that he left and stormed out of, was like, where he said, how have I ever benefited from my whiteness? And this is a guy who obviously got brought up in a very rich family in apartheid South Africa. He is completely and utterly clueless. If anything is tyrannical, it is billionaires influencing politics and driving them to exactly where we are right now. And what's more frustrating about this is that it's the right who've always made these weird conspiracy theories about, Bill Gates when he was the richest man in the world, because obviously a lot of those conspiracy theories come from the fact that he is known as the richest man in the world. And like almost all the things that the right for years have accused the left of doing when it's coming to, the richest man in the world, controlling policy, controlling the media, having connections everywhere. That is who Elon Musk is now. So why aren't they pointing the finger at him?
Precisely. I mean, our producers said, the police powers in criminalising asylum seekers and sentencing for activists, and then obviously that's what I alluded to with Just Oil. Labour are completely authoritarian. I said that before they were elected, and that's absolutely true. But obviously, when you hear people like Musk saying it's tyrannical, it is a dog whistle to say that we're living under communism. And I do want to speak to, if there's anyone on the right, again, anyone who likes Elon Musk or whatever, I don't know how many there are of you watching, but I want to say to you, right, let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about that, okay? Because to tell you what, right-wing politicians, they say they care about freedom of speech. They say they think that they're against states' control or whatever, but they don't care when it's private control. They don't care when it's corporations and people like Musk that control everything in your life. I mean, think of the algorithms. Think of your mobile phone and all the targeted advertisement at you. A lot of decisions that you think you make is pushed from billionaires to make a profit. What about the corporate media that tells you what to think? So I find it incredibly ironic that you've got Musk and the right and all these people, cabal on the right, that they care about freedom. No, they don't. They absolutely do not. And they're fooling you. They're fooling you into believing that actually give up your rights to private capital. No, it's bullshit. You can be against authoritarianism. Now, me, I'm as a socialist, I'm consistent. I don't like state authoritarianism, and I don't like corporate control. It's not one or the other, Now, before we move on, I would just like to say, there's a pretty good rant there, actually. I got my producer laughing in my ear, actually. Very distracting. If you like to support Turn Left's growth, then please share this video, spread the words to friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. This actually reminds me of that episode on Black Mirror, 15 minutes of what's it called? The episode where like they're in an actual tyrannical system, and the main guy sort of breaks out and he does this like monologue at the end, and then he's part of the system. I assure you're not part of the system, but please subscribe. 50 million merits, thank you. That's a cracking episode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then ignore me or go and Google 50 million merits of Black Mirror. Right now, there are 5 of us working as volunteers, but our goal is to one day make this our full-time work. So if you want to support us financially, then you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/supports. There you can support us monthly or give any one-off donation. Now, I'm really excited to go to our comments. Let's see what we have. Bodhi, I've seen... Sorry. It's a bit small for the screen on me. I've seen plenty indicators that friends from across the Atlantic are trying to covertly push narratives that would drive a further wedge between Britain and the EU. I'd be interested in who you mean by that.
No, I know a bit more about this. So obviously there's a lot of American groups who have been funding a lot of different projects across the UK. Part of the reason why, which people still haven't really talked about, a couple of weeks ago we introduced a bill a bill became in effect just a few weeks ago, which would protect people at abortion clinics where people couldn't like go and pray and protest outside of them. And part of that was driven by the fact that we've had such an increase in abuse outside of abortion abortion clinics over the last few years. They had to bring this law in, and most of these groups are funded by far-right Christian nationalists. We have what's the name of that non-official conservative conference that's been happening every year for the last few years? It's where like Jacob Rees-Mogg, like JD Vance appeared at it as well a couple of years ago. That's all funded by the US.
Is it NatCon?
Yeah, that's it, NatCon. That's all funded by the US, I believe. I think probably referring to that.
Tim WD, Keith is closer to Piers Morgan than he is to Keir Hardie. I mean, it's kind of a funny comment, but it is true. I mean, look, Keir Hardie would be spinning in his grave now. And actually, that just sort of unlocked a memory for me. Do you guys know who Matt Ford is? I'm sure a lot of you do. The comedian, the Blairite comedian. Oh, he's so cringe. He's the one who wrote that terrible remake. That name escapes me. I'm not very good at my pop references. Don't worry, I get it all the time. Matt Ford, anyway, and he said that what Jeremy Corbyn did to the party is turn it into a hard left clique, not speaking to the country. And he says that Keir Hardie and Clement Attlee was spinning in his grave over what Jeremy Corbyn did to the party. And I'm like, are you insane? These people are spinning in their graves over Keir Starmer and Tony Blair for privatising our public services, for going to war and to attacking the very people that are supposed to support you. I mean, do you think that Keir Hardie and Clement Attlee would go to war with the unions? Well, that's what Keir Starmer did. He sacked people for going on the front line with unions. So, I mean, that comment it triggered me a little bit, but you know, it's a clip for TikTok. Jay, good to see you. Labour, the British state is doing the bidding of capital and attacking all working class people, but especially disabled people continue to destroy the welfare benefit system. You're absolutely right. And that's a function of a so-called welfare state that is beholden to capital, is that it's disabled people are seen as useless eaters. It's an inherently fascist idea. And I'm not saying that the Labour Party are full fascist or whatever, but it's when you attack people on benefits, specifically sick and disabled people, it is a fascistic idea, and it's because these people aren't seen as useful under capital. Labour are completely beholden to the British state. That was clear under Tony Blair. But even still, you could say that a political party that is beholden to capital in the British state would have some concessions that would help people. I mean, I'm a big... I really do not like Tony Blair or the New Labour era. People know that, but I will say there were some good things they did, such as investment, Sure Start, devolution. But it seems that this iteration of the Labour Party absolutely want to destroy anyone, which is insane. But yeah, Jay, you're absolutely right.
Sorry,
Gargana, love
my
you
screen
too,
crashed for a
turn left,
second.
lol.
Apologies.
Love you too. Did you hear us in the background then? Because I thought our mics were off when we were talking over the video. It was like, oh, Gary's in the chat. Don't know. Any more? Simon Lee, they're only paying 50%, Lewis, 20%, not 40% capital gains. Yeah, so they're not even... Yeah, the end to the tax break, the capital gains, is not even that. They get 20%, not 40%. So it's even better for them. And they're still moaning.
Hello, Simon. That's one of my good friends.
Alex Otter, I'm on long-term disability. I'm terrified. I'm nearly 50. What hope do I have of finding an understanding work situation? So, as Lewis was saying earlier, these policies are instilling fear in people. And you're quite right. I mean, what do you do when you have a party that supposedly wants to stand up for you are continuing conservative policy on welfare? I'm sorry you're in that position. I'm really sorry that you feel that way. It's disgusting what Labour are doing. I think what we have to do, though, is we cannot rely on the state or the Labour Party. We have to rely on community organising on each other, because that's the only way we can do it. And if there's anyone out there who can contribute in some kind of way, maybe it's volunteering for a food bank or anything like that, that is important, because each other, that's all we have at the moment. We don't have anyone in our political system that gives a shit about us.
Another fault with the system as well is that once somebody goes on to any form of welfare benefits because they're out of work for whatever reason it might be, it's actually really hard to transition back off because of all these like stupid rules. And I'm not going to quote them exactly, but I know there's like you can go back to work and work a minimum amount of hours, but as soon as you go over those amount of hours, you can just get your benefits cut off. And where the threshold lies is that it doesn't actually incentivize people to actually want to take the big leap just in case they're not fully ready. Because if somebody's like, okay, I'm going to try and do 16 hours and you feel great, then you're like, okay, I want to try and maybe do 3 or 4 days a week instead of just 2 days a week. That's it. Your benefits could just be gone. It doesn't allow people to phase properly back into work, the system that's currently under play. And they really need to just change it all to allow people to be able to transition properly between being on state-assisted benefits and back into work. But the system does not work like that. It requires you to leap in, and it's faulty.
You know, I've been on universal credit on and off for years, and the biggest thing is the fear of not knowing what payment you're going to get, because obviously, I mean, first of all, like 40% of people who are in work, 40% who are on universal credit are in work because work doesn't pay, and for most of the time I was on universal credit, it's because I was in work, either because it was part-time or it was low pay, and if I worked that bit extra, I didn't know how much of my universal credit I was going to get. And it, to some people, if they're working part-time and they work a little bit more, you can see the incentive isn't there to work that bit more because you don't know how much is going to be reduced. And that's not people's fault. That is an entirely broken welfare system that doesn't look after the people. It demonizes people. And no one wants to address that that situation. No one wants to address, radically change welfare for the better. I know we were speaking to Zack earlier, you talked about UBI or Universal Basic Services, but that seems too kind for the political establishment. But, you know, I believe, we've got more comments. Scottish Soul, volunteer for Citizens Advice Bureau if you're in Scotland. There's a lot of support you can gain from them, but also being a volunteer helps the community immensely. Exactly. Even if you can't do much, just a little bit. Anything you can do, I think it helps, because I'll say it again, the state isn't there to protect us at the moment, and we need to rely on ourselves. And there are so many amazing communities out there that are willing to help. Double D, possibly the Samaritans need more people these days also. Samaritans is also a good shout. Is that all for our comments? No, we've got more. Ninja Vestos, I'm disabled and I hate how our community is being scapegoated. Why do government always blame vulnerable people like immigrants or disabled people on benefits? I mean, the straight answer is because it's an easy target. You know, when politicians say, oh, we need to make tough decisions. And every single time, it's a dog whistle, because when they say that, you know exactly what they're going to, what policy they're going to come up with. For them, that so-called tough decisions is clamping down on benefits, it's attacking immigrants and attacking working class people. That's an easy decision. If you're a person in power, that's easy. The fact that look, if it was such a hard decision, then why do the same decisions happen over and over again no matter who's in power if it was that difficult? No, it's because it's hard. The hard decision is to say, I'm going to stand up to corporate power. I'm going to stand up to the lobbyists who are destroying our democracy. I'm going to stand up to the donors who are giving us loads and loads of money. Because guess what? Politicians, and the higher you go to the top, by the way, spend less and less time with immigrants, with people on benefits, or working class people, and they spend more time with lobbyists, with professional managerial class people,
isn't it? It's the same old story, Curtis. It's like, let's blame disabled people, let's blame people on benefits, let's blame basically people who are the poorest in society. But hey, let's forget that the biggest transfer of wealth has just happened over the last few years. That's happened in decades, where literally the richest people in the world have doubled their wealth just in the last few years. But hey, let's forget about that. Let's just completely forget. Even this is just not just to the world. This is to the UK. Like, people are twice better off if you were a billionaire just a few years ago. But hey, let's go after disabled people on benefits.
And the thing is, though, when you go after vulnerable people, it's so easy because you're going with the grain. The entire corporate media blames immigrants and people on benefits, right? So when you're a politician, someone like Nigel Farage, they're not speaking up against the establishment. They're not telling it as it is. They are just going with the easiest thing to do, which is what everyone else is saying. The hard thing to do is to stand up to those that don't want you talking about them. I mean, imagine going on to the mainstream media and saying, by the way, the guys that own this media platform that I'm speaking on right now, I'm going to tax you more. Do you think that's easy to do? No, it's far harder, which is why 99% of politicians don't do it. Gary, relying on ourselves, I like what I'm hearing in theory. Hopefully it can be a reality for all of us. It sort of has to right now because we ain't got anyone with a fucking backbone. I want to thank you to all your comments, actually. That was a very good segment, but we are going to move on because we've got one more story to cover. Before we get into that, though, for those that don't know, we're on Blue Sky, and if you want to follow us. I sound like it's Professor Snape. No, hello. All right, okay. You're laughing too much in my ear now. You're distracting me. You can follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @turnleftmedia.co.uk. That concludes our comments, and we are going to move on. The so-called only democracy in the Middle East is continuing to act anything but a democracy. That's right. Israel has invoked sanctions on Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Israel's government approved on Sunday a proposal by Communications Minister Shlomo Kari that mandates any government-funded body refrain from communicating with Haaretz or placing advertisements in the paper. The proposal was approved by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The decision, according to the government's explanation, is a reaction to many editorials that have hurt the legitimacy of the state of Israel and its right to self-defense, and particularly the remarks made in London by Haaretz publisher Alma Shokin that support terrorism and call for imposing sanctions on the government. Now, this isn't the first time Israel has cracked down on the media. They also went for Al Jazeera. Both publications have held Israel accountable rather than push out pro-Israel Zionist propaganda. Lewis, we often hear the term, as I said earlier, from Western leaders that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, attacking media organizations that hold them to account is anything but a democracy.
It's so frustrating because, I read Israeli media every single day just to see what's going on there. I read Haaretz every day. I read the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, just to see what's going on. And this is what frustrates me about kind of the West in terms of Western media, Western politicians, is that they're not portraying the truth of what type of state Israel is in terms of all the stories that are going on there right now. Not only have we got Benjamin Netanyahu leaking Benjamin Netanyahu's team, a guy that works for his team last week got indicted for leaking fake intelligence to the media. Just today, a bill is getting discussed to sell off what is equivalent of their BBC because it's too critical of the government, so they're trying to get rid of it. As you said, we've got Al Jazeera that they've completely kicked out of Israel and the occupied territories. No, they raided their office, like a full-on police raid, which was live streamed, and now they're going after Haaretz. They are, if we're going back to that word, they are tyrannical. On top of that, just to add the cherry on top of the cake, they're also trying to introduce a bill in Parliament right now so Benjamin Netanyahu can change the rules as to who investigates the government on what happened during October 7th, right? So currently the process looks like this, that the Supreme Court Justice, the guy who's the head of the Supreme Court, appoints an independent panel to investigate failures of the government. They're trying to change that so the government can appoint their own panel on who's going to investigate their own failures in the government. To me, this just sounds like a government who is consolidating power, eliminating the media. And on top of that as well, just to add another story into the mix, a left-wing politician, an MK, which is equivalent to an MP over here, a member of the Knesset, got suspended for 6 months for the same thing that happened in Haaretz, because they were angry at the editor for using the word freedom fighter when referring to Palestinians. She did not say Hamas. She did not use those words. She regrets it and says that maybe they should have clarified exactly who they were referring to. But this is what happened with this MK last week. They got suspended for using the term freedom fighters in reference to Palestinians, and they have now been kicked out of the Knesset for 6 months. A democracy, Curtis? A democracy? Absolutely not in any way.
Yeah, I want to ask, what implication do you think this is going to have on reporting? Obviously, Al Jazeera was attacked, but we still do get coverage from them. Overall, Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, has been good on holding Israel to account. But do you think this is going to be a lot harder for us, us at Turn Left or other British publications, to report on Israel if we have far less information about what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah, Haaretz is a fantastic publisher. They are, I don't know, I'd put them probably on par with in terms of their type of coverage with The Guardian. They're kind of like that left-leaning newspaper in Israel. Some of the investigations that they have done, the power that they've held to account. One of the most famous investigations that they've done from the last year is that they're the ones who revealed that on October 7th, Israel used the Hannibal Directive, which was where they basically shot their own soldiers so they couldn't get sent back to.
Which
They,
was
they,
dubbed
they
a
couldn't get dragged
conspiracy
into
theory by
Israel.
so many as well. They said it's almost blood. That's it. They were saying it's
Yeah.
blood libel to suggest that. Well, Haaretz confirmed that no, it's true, and that is integral to a democracy, because that type of reporting is excellent.
Yeah, they go into the West Bank as well. They interview Palestinians. They really give them a voice. There's obviously people in there who aren't as left. They do still have conservative people who actually work for the outlet. They do have a wide range of opinions, and their opinion section is really great. But again, this is just another attack on democracy, another attack on the press, and this is what they're going to keep doing. They're slowly getting rid of any systems, any forms of accountability against themselves, and it's very scary. And also, as well, in terms of the long term, Israel is becoming less of a secular society. So when it gets to the point where it is more highly religious, and those people, a lot of the institutions are still held by, they're still quite secular in a way. The army is actually overwhelmingly quite secular, and they're actually scared that once the religious population outnumbers, the more Orthodox population outnumbers the secular population, that they're essentially going to go into a full-blown Jewish nationalist state, which has the massive religious element inside of it. And they're setting up all these systems essentially for them to be taken over by religious zealots in the future. So they're essentially shooting themselves in the foot for short-term gain of being held accountable. As well, I was reading that the Attorney General is against pretty much all of these moves. She's constantly writing open letters against the government about all these moves, all these anti-democratic moves that have been put against Israel, its politics, its systems, and its people. And nobody's talking about it in the West. Literally no one. No one. It's barely being reported on.
Well, I mean, a lot of the excuses you get from governments in a time of war is that, well, when you have dissent, it's dangerous and it's undermining our war efforts, right? I've always hated that. I criticised Zelensky when, the Russia-Ukraine war first broke out. He attacks unions and he attacks those in the media. Now, some people said to me, well, look, you're fighting a war here. You can't have people undermine you. And it's like, but it's the classic line, isn't it? It's like, the first casualty of war is the truth. You cannot have that, because you think it's temporary, especially what Israel is doing. You think they're going to just silence Haaretz for now? I mean, that'll be something they will continue to do, because, as you've just pointed out, the demographic shifts from a less secular society to a more religious one. Well, media scrutiny is going to be something that's going to undermine it. So, whatever happens in Gaza, if that ends, right? I mean, it will end, but when that ends, Israel aren't going to suddenly go back to a fully democratic state. Or I don't think they ever were fully democratic, but they're not going to go back to what it was before. They're going to keep a lot of the changes they got now, because they might say, well, we need to silence the media now because we could go back to what happened before. It's always an excuse just to grab power.
Yeah. Just to give you an example as well, the type of media that Benjamin Netanyahu does like, and this was a story that Haaretz reported on a couple of months ago. I can't remember if it's channel 12 or channel 14, so take that with a grain of salt. But there is a TV channel in Israel that Benjamin Netanyahu appeared on for his first sit-down interview. It was about 7 months into the war. It was in around June time of this year. And this channel has been getting tracked by multiple human rights charities, because a report was released, I think this was in October, of the 50 different times they have called for the genocide of the Palestinians. And we're not talking about, just like casual little words. No, the hosts and the guests have literally called on the show at least 50 times for these people just to be completely wiped out, for them to be starved. And that's the TV show that Benjamin Netanyahu did his first interview on. So it just shows you the type of media that he likes. And by the way, that some of these quotes from this specific TV show has been used in the South Africa ICJ case, the International Court for the Genocide case. These quotes are being used, but that's the TV show that Benjamin Netanyahu likes, not Haaretz.
I mean, if Elon Musk wants to talk about tyranny, here's one: apartheid, genocidal, tyrannical state. But of course, he doesn't really care about that. Lewis, thank you. I want to thank everyone actually who joined us. Lewis, thank you for your insights. You've been fantastic on covering up for Israel. I have to say, viewers, I mean, Lewis has been on the thumb when it comes to updates about the ICJ, the ICC, and Gaza. So I got to say, you got to hand it to you. You're doing better work than most of the mainstream media out there. Now, if you haven't liked the stream, please make sure you do, because it does help the algorithm. And again, if you want to see Turn Left continue to grow, then make sure you share this. When the stream is finished, come back and drop a comment. Could be anything. Tell your friends and family about us. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button now. Again, there are only 5 of us working voluntarily for Turn Left, and we want to be in a position that this is our full-time jobs. We're paid for this. One added benefit would be that, instead of finishing work at 5, writing the scripts and producing the show, we've got all day to do it. How much better would the production be then? Now, you can do that by supporting us financially, either monthly or with a one-off donation by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/supports. We'll be back Wednesday, but until then, I'm Curtis Daly, and I'll see you next time.
Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.